Hello and welcome to a special episode of Indo Politics with me, Aisling Maloney. Now, the government introduced the Regulation of Artificial Intelligence Bill into the Dáil this week. This legislation seeks to set up an AI office, and the government has to get that through in the next 3 weeks in order to establish the office by the 1st of August, or else they're in breach of EU regulations. Now, Junior Minister Niamh Smith joins me in studio to talk about this, about a smartphone ban for under 16 and the future of Fianna Fáil. I'd like to welcome to the studio Minister of State Niamh Smith with special responsibility for AI, digitalisation and trade promotion at the Department of Enterprise. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Aisling.
So it's been a busy week. You've introduced into the Dáil the Artificial Intelligence Regulation Bill, which is going to, I suppose, most interestingly for people, set up an AI office as soon as August even. So you're trying to get this legislation through even before the summer recess in a number of weeks' time. So tell us about this AI regulation bill and what change people will notice from it.
Well, I suppose the first thing to say is artificial intelligence is such a hot topic. I mean, from I was appointed only 16 months ago, I think people might have been sort of saying to themselves, artificial intelligence, AI, probably won't impact me, whereas I think 16 months later we can all see artificial intelligence affects every walk of life, whether it be business, education, healthcare, and there's a real, I suppose, excitement around it. That's not to say or discount that there's concern around it too. The EU has passed their AI Act, and as a result of that, here in Ireland we are now introducing our AI regulation bill, and that bill will do a number of things, but I suppose the most important part of that is to establish a national AI office. So your next question might be, well, what will that do? Bearing in mind I'm in the Department of Enterprise, it is working with existing regulators to ensure that businesses across this island can comply with the AI Act. That's it in short and simple terms. But it will have a much broader scope than just that.
And of course, you said there in 16 months' time this has changed a lot. And actually during the debate when you introduced this, I think it was the Independent Ireland TD Michael Collins said that in rural Ireland AI meant something completely different and that there'd have to be a new name for the bullman coming forward. But tell me about this AI office, because most people would think, you know, okay, they're introducing sort of a regulator or an agency in this form, but actually the AI office won't be directly regulating the AI. It's going to be up to the agencies like the CCPC, Commission Naman, and like the Central Bank, for example, to regulate AI within their respective agencies. So the AI office will what? Be kind of like a convener and an overseer and a point of contact for Brussels, essentially. Exactly,
and it is that one-stop shop. As you said, there are 15 competent authorities. We have lots of regulators in Ireland, and I suppose what Ireland and what this government has been very mindful of, as you will be aware, the Draghi report, which was published last year, the one thing we have, we can all agree on across Europe, and it's scientifically proven, if you like, that bureaucracy has almost gone mad in Europe, and it has affected businesses, it has stifled innovation, and I would argue has maybe made creativity and the opportunity to develop, grow, scale in business in Ireland, but mostly across Europe, a problem. So when we were establishing this AI office, we were very mindful not to introduce any new bureaucracy, not to expect businesses to have to deal with another regulator. They have relationships built up with their existing regulators, and those relations are good. Those relations are established, and so the AI office will feed into, as I said, 15 competent authorities. That means that businesses don't have to get to know a new regulator, and those competent authorities can feed from the AI office in terms of the expertise, the guidance, the guardrails, and ensuring that businesses do comply and industry complies with AI here in Ireland.
But are those authorities, you mentioned 15 there, are they equipped to take this on? Because AI is such a complex area to police. So do they have the resources? Because when you first brought through this bill, the general scheme back in February, it did talk about a levy being placed on tech companies, essentially those who originate and use the AI, that they would be levied to finance their policing, essentially, and their regulation. But that's not mentioned in what you introduced this week. So is there enough finance behind these regulators to actually have teeth to police the AI?
Well, we do take the policing of AI and the use of it in the correct way that both assists and supports and helps the industry, but also to ensure that it is human-centred and that we don't forget about, I suppose, the harmful things that can happen with the use of AI. It will be properly resourced. We have 1.5 million ring-fenced in the last budget for the establishment of the AI office. We have a new director who is appointed. I cannot reveal that name because contracts haven't been signed yet, but it was gone through all the usual public services appointments, if you like. So we hope to be able to announce that name in the coming days. And the Department of Enterprise, working with some of the officials, have appointed a skeleton staff, if you like, to get it up and running. But we will have it in a very official capacity because, as you know, the AI Act has to be implemented. We have very stringent deadlines in the very short few weeks ahead. And we want to make sure that Ireland is in place and has its AI office in place to act upon, but most importantly, to have the enforcement piece in place around AI.
And can you say, I suppose, around the staff, like how many staff are going to be in this AI office? You mentioned we have a lot of regulators. There's a lot of regulation staff around Dublin, around Ireland. How many staff are going to be in this?
At the moment, it'll start with maybe 10. It'll be small numbers to begin with, growing to perhaps 40 over the next 12 months, I would imagine. And I suppose at that point, it'll be an entity of its own. It will be independent of government. It will be independent of the Department of Enterprise. So I suppose it will scale and grow. As we know, artificial intelligence is something that's changing. It's very fluid. I would suggest and predict that the expertise, the technical expertise that is required in helping and supporting the existing regulators to be able to regulate around AI will be vast. That expertise will be, we'll need lots of it, if you like. And that's, I suppose, one of the main points of the AI office, that it will have the staff, the expertise that can, as I suppose, advise and guide existing ones. And also to say we will be putting together a sandbox. And for your viewers, like myself, a sandbox.
What is that? Yeah.
It sounds like a toy almost, doesn't it? And I do have that picture. You have a picture of a child with a sandbox. However, this sandbox, not dissimilar to a child's sandbox, is a piece of software for those who may be exploring, inventing, creating new AI tools and apps to make sure it is done within the guardrails set out by the EU AI Act and, of course, within the guardrails within our own domestic laws as well.
And this particular AI office, it won't itself have market surveillance authority. It's relying on those 15 regulators to kind of feed back to them. So will it really have teeth if it can't do anything itself?
No. I mean, enforcement is going to be a huge part of that. And I'm confident that it will, working with the existing regulators. I mean, the purpose that we didn't do another regulation piece is going back to that point that we want to encourage businesses in this country. We want to make it a good ecosystem for them to be able to develop, to grow, to scale. I work very closely with Enterprise Ireland, with IDA, with our local LEOs across the country, and that has been kind of the one resonating message that has come back to me all the time, is not more bureaucracy. So we want to give confidence to businesses that while we all want to encourage businesses to adopt AI and to adapt it within their business environments, that they can do it with the support of the AI office.
And I suppose, like, there's question on an overall level about AI and how we're dealing with it. Is it a mistake to deal with it through an enterprise prism in the first instance, and that it's also a societal issue? Should it not take more of a role? Are we trading protection of certain, I suppose, sections of society for competitiveness?
No, I think it has come from our department to initiate this, to put it in place, and that's what we're doing. However, when the AI office is established, it is going to be more than just for enterprise. It will be for our citizens to make complaints to. They will be able to do that. I mean, I have a huge emphasis, and for me, what's really important is the protection of children online. And I have no doubt that as I'm not the CEO or the director of the AI office, but I mean, I don't think you can talk about AI and enterprise in silos. You have to think about the much broader picture and how it affects our citizens, and the piece around the protection of citizens, but mostly children. And I have no doubt that will all come into play with the AI office when it's established and up and running.
And even when you talk about it from an enterprise prism, the ESRI even warning this week that AI will have an overall adverse impact on the Irish economy, and that gains from any productivity will be outweighed by job losses. Are we moving too fast in a direction that we haven't we don't know the final outcome. Similar maybe to how we moved with social media, allowing these companies essentially free rein, and now society is questioning, their place.
Well, firstly to say we have really strong online safety and media regulation bill in this country, and there is laws there to protect children, to protect citizens online. The policing of that, of course, comes to the responsibility of Commissioner Mann, who will obviously be working very closely with the AI office as well. I know Hotline is obviously another important entity in this country that gives parents somewhere to make the complaint and ensure the takedown of online content, and also on Garda Síochána. And I always kind of like to have the opportunity just to remind people those three entities in this country are really critically important for harmful content, for CSAM, as you know. During the, and we may delve into this a little bit, some months back, we had a real issue with grok in this country, not just in this country, but across Europe. Commissioner Mann mobilised themselves very quickly, out gathering information, working with the European Commission. And as a result of that, we in Ireland have driven ensuring that prohibited practices is included in the establishment of the AI bill and in AI regulation in this country and right across Europe. And that will be a real focus for me in the presidency in the months ahead.
And talking about the presidency there, because as you said, the European Commission, on foot of what happened with grok both in Ireland and across Europe at the start of this year, they launched an investigation into grok, but they also had another investigation that was ongoing into recommender algorithms on X, the platform, and they combined those two investigations. But that first one had been going on since 2023. Can you kick on those investigations? Can you put pressure on them to speed up those investigations into X during the EU presidency?
Absolutely, and I think it's important to point out that President Ursula von der Leyen has taken a real interest in this area too, about the protection of children and citizens online, and established an expert panel earlier on this year that have met quite a number of times, that will be reporting in the next couple of weeks in terms of how we deal with the protection of children online and what other further steps we need to do to, I suppose, protect citizens and make sure that companies really do have a high moral compass. I mean, as we talk about AI and the development of technology, it also improves the capability and capacity within these companies to protect children. So you can't have one without the other, and the companies can't have the discussion about, how their technology is ramping up without also being cognizant of being able to protect people online, whether it's taking it down, whether it's checking for misinformation, whether it's fact checking the way that you and other journalists have to do all the time. That will have to come into it more and make it way more capable for them to do it with the development of the technology also.
And something that came up recently, and even your party leader, Micheál Martin, had to make a video about a deepfake AI video that was purporting to be him. Obviously had an English accent, so it was very clearly not the Cork man, but it was very clear to anyone who had kind of that discerning eye but could reel in other people. Deepfake AIs, the Taoiseach Simon Harris last week on foot of that then said that he wants to see social media companies step up there, that there is EU regulations coming in that you'll have to mark certain content to say that it's synthetic, that it's been created by AI, but that social media companies are profiting from this content going up and people keeping scrolling, earning them money. What do you think they should do? What do you want to see those social media companies do in relation to that specific AI deepfake technology on their platforms?
Well, I mean, the piece we worry quite a bit, and we saw, as I said, with grok, we also saw what happened to Gráinne Seoige during the last general election. And these things really impact people, their lives, them themselves, their family around them. So as part of, I suppose, hammering down on the possibility and the proliferation of deepfakes, the watermark will become incredibly important. And I suppose the establishment of the AI office will demonstrate to Europe and to companies outside Europe how seriously we take this in terms of the policing of it, the enforcement of it, and the hefty fines that companies will face if they are not willing to abide by the rules and laws within Europe and within Ireland.
And I suppose on that grok situation, so that's the app we're referencing, the notification app essentially within the X platform, you were very vocal on it when it happened back in January, and you said that actually X should be banned if they don't comply with the laws of this country, which is there are laws against the dissemination of child sexual abuse imagery and the creation of it. I suppose, do you kind of stand by that?
Absolutely, yes, I do. And I think that we have a real opportunity with the presidency, as I said, and a real sharp focus will be obviously on regulating AI, but also around the protection of children and the online safety for children. We're having a youth forum that is happening in June, where we're going to take in the voices of children. And the second half of the presidency will be really focused on that particular issue. We're really, as I said, a government across departmental, not just in my department, but obviously in Minister Patrick O'Donovan's, whose responsibility is communications and culture. It is going to be a really prominent theme within our presidency, and it's a real opportunity for us to say to the tech companies that are in Ireland, to Europe, that we take this matter really seriously, and the protection of children is incredibly important to us as a government.
And I suppose, speaking there about children, the social media ban for under 16s has been kind of touted in Ireland, the UK, and it's already enforced in Australia. But we're hearing news this week that it's actually had very little impact in Australia. Why are the Irish government pursuing it?
I think it's really important, Aisling, and I feel very, very strongly about this. I mean, we can take a lacklustre approach and say, well, age doesn't matter. But, in this country, we accept that, you don't go and buy alcohol or consume alcohol until you're 18 years of age. You don't go into a shop and you buy cigarettes until you're 18 years of age. And we're not saying that prevents it completely. Of course it doesn't. But it sends a very clear signal to both children and parents of what is there, laws that are there to protect them. Laws aren't introduced to harm people. Laws are introduced to protect them, and for good reason. And it is incredibly important, and I really have huge admiration for Mick Moran in Hotline, because, I mean, he said it very candidly in the media last night himself. Parents have to take responsibility on giving the device to their child, at what age they're giving the device to their child. And I mean, I have a 9-year-old at home myself. I know it's difficult. And I really admire parents within schools that take this view that they all agree that their child's not going to get a phone or a smart device until they get to first year in secondary school. Maybe a tough decision, but I think it's certainly one they won't regret.
Do you think it's something that the government could say, to ban the sale of smartphones to those under 16 or something like that?
I think we have to look at all options, and I do think it's a very credible thing to really look at, I suppose, age verification for social media platforms. I know the naysayers might say, well, it didn't work in Australia, but we must do something. Standing by and letting it happen won't achieve anything. Okay. And the protection of the next generation is incredibly important.
And I suppose on that, because we mentioned that sometimes, or it's been shown in some evidence that it's not really having an impact, would it be a more effective route to make the platforms, I suppose, give them higher responsibility? You've spoken before about that you think that we should very seriously look at, or the Irish government should very seriously look at, making the platforms publishers. Would that help? And do you still think that the government should pursue something like that?
Well, I suppose there's a number of jumps and hurdles we have to take here. Let's get the AI office in place. Let's get the regulation piece done. Let's look at age verification pieces as well. So I think we do this by stealth, but the goal is to protect children ultimately. And whatever needs to be done, needs to be done. However, I do think that the companies, they obviously, they care what governments think and what we're saying. And we are consistent in a very clear message that there has to be guardrails in place. I mean, people look to trusted sources for their information, right? So people know that when they're reading the Irish Independent, everything has been fact-checked, it's trusted, it's not fake, it's not made up. And I think that as time progresses, and I would say in very short time, that people will start looking at the social media companies in the same light. Is there a social media company there that they can, post something on, that they can trust the information that's coming? And I think the social media companies need to start looking at it in that vein if they want to be head and shoulders of all the others, because it's a very crowded, I suppose, playing field at the moment. And I would say that should be important to those tech companies also.
Okay. And I suppose just on that, idea of banning the smartphones, you said you need to look at everything, and you mentioned there that parents often feel a lot of pressure to buy those smartphones for their children. I even know, I have a niece, and she got one for her confirmation. She's buzzing to get it, but we're all in the family oh God, hating the idea of her having one.
I know.
So could the government take that decision away from parents and say, you can't buy your child a smartphone if they're under 16. If they're found with a smartphone, it's illegal, that kind of a thing. Same with something like alcohol. Could that be workable?
Yeah. Well, as I said, we have to have an open mind about this, and all options have to be on the table until we get on top of it. And I'm not saying that we're going to have a panacea or that there is a panacea solution to this problem, but I think we have to be very mindful of it. We have to be cognizant of it. We have to be talking about it across all government departments, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's media, whether it's enterprise, because everything's affected.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is about the next generation of adults. It's about the next generation of problem solvers. It's about the next generation of critical thinkers, but also the mental health aspect to it. And I know Minister Mary Butler would have done an incredible amount of work on this area too, but it affects everything. So as I said, the government's incredibly focused on it. The Taoiseach has led out with the National Digital and AI Strategy, and a bit like the social media themselves, it's refreshed quite often, and that's to try. I suppose we'll never be able to stay ahead of the technology, but to try our utmost to do what we can to protect people as technology develops.
And I suppose, that's all very interesting and it's very forward looking, isn't it? But let's take a minute and look back maybe. Your grand uncle, Paddy Smith, was a founding member of Fianna Fáil and the longest serving TD with 53 years serving in the Dáil, and still his record is not beaten. What do you think he would think of the Fianna Fáil party now?
Oh God, Aisling.
Taking you right back there.
I wasn't expecting that at all. What would he think? I suppose, Uncle Packy, like a lot of politicians of that, politics has changed enormously. There was no social media. I still have some lovely handwritten letters that constituents have given me over the years that he wrote to people. And it was all sort of, sitting in, dare I say, pubs and having conversations with people, being at the fair day and having conversations with people, driving up and down to Dublin. His wife and children didn't have the luxury of seeing too much of him. I suppose he would be maybe, as regards how we do politics, he might argue it's much easier to do politics now because we can pick up the phone and we can talk to people or we can send them a message. And the party, the party's 100 years old this year, and I feel very, I suppose, humbled to be there as a TD myself and a minister in a department and with a portfolio that I really, really enjoy. And as the party, I suppose he worked with and was alongside a lot of powerful figures at the time. Eamon De Valera and himself were great pals, and I always think it was great for me to have an opportunity to share some of my time in the Dáil with Eamon O'Queeve. And that history, I suppose, follows the whole way back. So, I think he'd be looking on to say, isn't it wonderful to see Fianna Fáil still in government and being able to rise from the ashes after very, very difficult times in the past. Not just to rise from the ashes, but to prove to people that we are a party that is deeply, deeply concerned about the constituents and the communities that we represent, which I feel very strongly about. And to have the pragmatic approach that we do to politics in every aspect. And I always think it's incredible how people can move from one portfolio to another portfolio in the lifetime of a government. But I think that's because we're a very pragmatic tribe, if you like.
Okay. And I suppose, as you say, things have changed a lot. And even like the role of women, both in De Valera's Ireland compared to the Ireland that we are living in now, Micheál Martin's Ireland, let's say, is very different. But I suppose within the Fianna Fáil party, there is a lot of commentary about the lack of females at the top. Do you think Fianna Fáil has a problem with women?
Oh God, I don't think it is a problem with women. I think the problem is across all politics, where it can be difficult to encourage women into politics. And that's the topic we've just had a long conversation about, and social media certainly is a preventative. I know women who would work very closely with me and would love maybe to put themselves out there, but I suppose what the rhetoric and the abuse, let's just say, that you can face in social media is something questionable for women and their families and all who might consider getting involved in politics. But no, we have a very vibrant and energetic parliamentary party. We have lots of really good women, both in the Seanad and in the Dáil as well, who are eager to take on whatever role of responsibility they're handed. Look at Mary Butler, Chief Whip of the party, and certainly lives up to that very illustrious title as well.
And I suppose, you know, we talk about Micheál Martin's leadership. It's been talked about a lot in the media. You've been asked multiple times, and I suppose everyone in your party is giving the same answer, that there is no vacancy. But
Which there isn't, actually.
Yeah, well, thanks for reminding me again. But you know, none of the I suppose when people talk about the future of the party, none of the people they're talking about to take over are any of the women at the top. Is that a problem? Are women not being given enough space to shine?
They may be when the time comes. Who knows?
What about your own ambitions?
Well, I've always been ambitious in politics. I mean, nobody wants to ever stand still, no matter what career path you take. And as I said, I relish the job that I do have. But no, there's lots of talent in the party, lots of female talent, and of course lots of male talent too. And I think that, you know, our parliamentary party shows that.
And I suppose, you know, one issue of politics, that's something that Fianna Fáil likes to kind of say, that you're the Republican Party. But I suppose Fine Gael have kind of come out in recent days saying that they're going to launch a blueprint on Irish unity later this year. Where's Fianna Fáil on that? Where is your blueprint? And is Fine Gael kind of jumping the gun there on ye in a way on a united Ireland?
No, I mean, I suppose I feel incredibly passionate about this because I'm from the border. I do remember the times that the border was a very physical thing that prevented people travelling from one side to the other. I really absolutely never take it for granted for one moment the peace that we have on this island. And there are lots of things you can criticise Fianna Fáil and former leaders for, but you could never take away from Bertie Ahern the gift that he gave this country, and that's peace. And it is nothing that I ever would take for granted. And we wear our Republican credentials very proudly, and we will continue to do so. And, you know, it's not, nobody has a monopoly on that, okay? And every political party within this country should be thinking about that. But Micheál Martin has done it and demonstrated it in a very practical way with the establishment of the shared island. So creating papers is one thing, but I always think actions speak much louder than words. And for example, this week we saw the shared island announced millions right across the north of this island, one of them being in my own constituency in the Ulster Canal, which there was 30 million ring fence for the third stage of that Ulster Canal. But that's an incredibly important piece of infrastructure for the Cavan Monaghan area. Why? Because it will bring the potential it will create in tourism, the footfall that it will bring to the local area, the beautiful amenity it will bring for the local people is incredibly important. So I think Micheál, with the establishment and being the brainchild of the shared island, did something that is far more powerful. He's put money behind it. He's put action behind it. He's established so many working groups that are really, I suppose, bringing people together and doing it in a much more real way than any paper can do.
See, you've got the Micheál Martin talking points there for the shared island. But I suppose one person
I genuinely feel passionate about, and I suppose selfishly so, because I live in the border.
Absolutely,
county, you know.
And I suppose one person who maybe strayed from the talking points this week was Minister Jim O'Callaghan, who was talking to the Irish News, saying that he can see a border poll in this decade. Do you agree? Would you like to see a border poll in this decade?
I would, and I think I mean I want to see a united Ireland. I want to see it now, but I'm equally cognizant of the fact that you have to do it in a way that brings people with you. I mean, that's what real leadership is bringing people with you, not being some divisive voice, but being a voice that brings people with you. And if that means, like through the shared island, of getting people into the room and ask them, well, what's going to make your community better? Is it infrastructure? Is it something within university? Is it something with healthcare? And doing it in a real way that matters to people, that makes lives better for people.
There's been a lot of talk, as I mentioned, about Micheál Martin's leadership of Fianna Fáil, with many speculating that, I suppose, the EU presidency is maybe an honorary lap of statesmanship for Micheál Martin, and that the party will kind of let him carry on until the new year. Why is no one challenging him? Why are there not contenders in the Fianna Fáil party nipping at his heels, mounting heaves and invigorating the party to take over, like Jim O'Callaghan or Dara Cleary or any of the others that have been talked about?
Well, who knows what's going on in the background? Who knows? As I said, like, there is lots of talent within Cabinet. There's lots of ambition within Cabinet. And I think that there's a respectfulness too towards our Taoiseach, Micheál Martin. He has led the party, as I said, from the ashes earlier on. And when I have no doubt whenever he decides that he's ready to hang up his hat, there'll be a very energetic and enthusiastic competition for the role.
And I suppose you mentioned, we were talking about women in politics, I suppose, and maybe Fianna Fáil's own issues, but you mentioned there that there's a myriad of reasons why women aren't going into politics in a large part. I mean, they represent 50% of the country, so 50% should be in the Dáil, you would think. You were elected as a TD in 2016, and in that same year you had your daughter Juliet. Talk to me about that. That must have been like difficult, or how did you weigh it up? Because there's a lot of talk now about attracting women into politics and that it's not family friendly. We've even had male politicians. I know Fine Gael's Brendan Griffin down in Kerry often talked about how it was not family friendly. He had 2 small boys. Helen McEntee has taken maternity leave, and Holly Cairns again, and only in recent years, in the last 2 years, has maternity leave become you actually are allowed to take it as a TD. It wasn't a thing before then. So you didn't have that in 2016.
No.
There wasn't much fanfare about it.
No, I was back to work within 2 weeks. And so some people would say it might have been an easier life to stay working as an art teacher, which I loved dearly. But I think when I think it's the ingredients of what makes public representatives tick. You're a little bit restless, that you're eager and you're hungry to serve the community or the constituency that you're in. But that is not to discount that political life isn't very family friendly. Like, I mean, I was going home last night at 1 a.m. this morning. Juliet's in a dance show tonight in Neathas in Castleblayney. Didn't get to see her performance last night, but fingers crossed I will tonight. And she's kind of growing up with it too. So she knows, she doesn't know anything else, I suppose, really. You know, she knows the swings and roundabouts of it. But I suppose it's a great privilege for the time that you get to do it, but you cannot do it without the support of your family. And you cannot do it without the support of your team in your office. I have four fabulous staff in my constituency, 50-50, 2 women, 2 men. So I suppose, and they always have my back. They give me the breathing space to do the work that I need to do in Dublin and keep me totally abreast of what I need to do in the constituency too. But all the while, there's my parents, there's lots of family and great friends who help me out in the background to make sure that Juliet has some sort of a normal life.
And I suppose, is there something that you think could be changed to make it more attractive for women? And like, you know, a lot of women coming up into the prime of their career are often having children, and it can impact their trajectory. And, you know, many will argue that it absolutely shouldn't. So is there something that could be done?
It's funny you should say that, because like since I've gone into the Department of Enterprise, we've had many discussions too around women in business and their career paths and how their career paths are impacted by having children, by raising families. And I don't think it's just in politics. It's in many walks of life. It's within many industries. Could we do things to make family life a little bit easier and better, make it more family friendly in politics? Perhaps we could. It's a difficult balancing act, because I suppose I'm maybe a 2-hour journey home at night and 2 hours up in the morning. But arguably, if you're from Cork, you're 3 or 4 hours. So it's not conducive. So maybe that's why, and that's obviously why Brendan has a very understanding wife, that he could do that. So there's definitely things, measures that we could take around that. And I know the Women's Caucus, which is led by Senator Fiona O'Loughlin, certainly look at those things. The changes, I suppose, come from the Commission, and perhaps we have a female Cancórla now too, that those could be looked at a little bit closely to see what changes could be made to make it more doable for
maybe
women.
About even around pairing or votes,
yes,
or maybe the length of time with which debates go on, or...
I don't think that really is, because we don't have to be there for every debate, and we used to vote on a Thursday. Now we vote on a Wednesday night. So perhaps the pairing piece and looking to women who have small kids and being able to say, right, you know, there's a special dispensation maybe if you have small kids. You know, there's probably little tweaks that could be made. I know when Sean O'Friel was there, he certainly did a lot of work around this in terms of nursing rooms for women that had small babies. And those kind of simple things can just help tilt the decision for women as to, is this something I can take on or is it not?
Okay, very good. Well, look, thank you very much for answering the wide range of questions there. I'm sure we could go on and go around in circles at the same time as well. So thank you very much for joining me on this special podcast. Thanks very much, Niamh Smith, and thanks very much for all of you watching. We'll be back soon with more. And if you want to read more, you can read the Irish Independent.